My name is Eliza Hartwell, and I answered the advertisement with my left hand, because my right one has not held a pen since the fire. I want to tell you that straight, the way I could not tell the man I was traveling to meet, because for 11 days on the train, from Ohio to the Wyoming Territory, I rehearsed the confession until it wore smooth in my mouth. And still I could not find the shape of it that would not end with him sending me back on the next stage. I was 24 years old in the spring of 1884, a widow of 2 years, and I had a right hand that curled in on itself like a leaf held too near a candle, the fingers drawn and the skin gone shiny and tight from the wrist to the second knuckle, and I could not milk a cow with it, nor knead a proper loaf, nor wring a chicken's neck, nor do the 100 hard, useful things a rancher's wife is meant to do between dark and dark. The lamp had tipped in the night the winter my husband died of the fever, and I had reached for it out of sleep with the wrong hand, and I had saved the house and lost the hand, and my husband had died anyway 3 days later, so that I came out of that season with a scar I would carry to my grave, and nothing at all to show for the carrying. My people were gone. My husband's people had no room for a woman who ate but could not fully work. And so when the notice came through the marriage agency in Cheyenne, a rancher wanting a wife, a widower with a small daughter and 400 head, and a house he described as quiet, I wrote back with my left hand, and I told him everything true about myself except the one thing. And I have been ashamed of that omission every day since. And I have also understood every day since that if I had told him, I would never have met him. And some debts you cannot see how to pay until you are standing inside the house they bought you. His letters were short. He wrote like a man who paid for each word out of his own pocket. His name was Caleb Ainsworth, and he told me he was 30 years old, that his wife had passed of a lung sickness 2 winters back, that his daughter was 6 and had not spoken more than a handful of words since the burying, and that he could offer me a good roof, honest work, and his protection, and that he did not expect love, but he would not be unkind. I read that letter 40 times. I do not expect love, but I will not be unkind. It was the plainest promise anyone had made me in years, and it was the reason I packed my mother's Bible and 2 dresses and a widow's small ruin of belongings into a carpet bag and rode 11 days west to a town called Sweetwater, with my ruined hand shoved deep in a muff of gray wool that I would not take off, even indoors, even sweating, because the muff was the last hour I would have of being a whole woman in his eyes, and I wanted to keep it as long as I could. The train let me off in the wind. There is a kind of wind in that country that does not stop for weather or night, or the fact that a person is trying to hold herself together standing on a platform, and it took my hat nearly off and pressed my traveling dress flat against me, and I stood there with my carpet bag in my good hand, and my ruined one buried in the muff, and I looked for a man who fit the plainness of the letters. I found him by the way he was standing. Everyone else on that platform was in motion, but there was a tall man beside a buckboard wagon, holding a bunch of blue camas flowers gone wilted in his fist, holding them the way a man holds a thing he does not know why he is holding, and I knew before he spoke that this was Caleb Ainsworth. Because a man does not stand that still, that unsure, in the wind, unless he is waiting to be disappointed and hoping he is wrong. He was tall and sun-browned, with a dark beard kept short and eyes the gray of a coming storm, and beside him, half hidden in his coat, was a small girl with 2 brown braids and her mother's fear on her face, watching me the way a cat watches a stranger's boots. He took off his hat. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said. "Mr. Ainsworth," I said, and my heart was going so hard I thought he must hear it over the wind. He held out the flowers, and they were the saddest, bravest flowers I have ever been given. Wind broke and wilting, picked by a man's rough hands from the side of some creek that morning, and I had to reach for them, and I had a decision to make in half a second with the whole rest of my life inside it, which was whether to take those flowers with my good left hand and leave the ruined one hidden in the muff a while longer, or to be honest on the platform in the wind. I took them with my left hand. God forgive me, I took the coward's road on the very first minute, and he did not seem to notice, and the little girl noticed everything. We rode out to the ranch with the child between us on the wagon seat, and Caleb Ainsworth talked the way a nervous, quiet man talks, in bursts about the land. That creek there ran year-round. Those were his cattle on the far rise, the house his own father had raised in '69. And I answered soft and kept my hand in my lap under a fold of my shawl. And the little girl, whose name was Nell, did not say one word the whole 9 miles, but once, when the wagon jolted, her small hand came out and caught my sleeve to steady herself, and then snatched back, like she'd touched a stove. And she looked up at me terrified that she'd done wrong, and I smiled at her with everything I had, and she did not smile back, but she did not move away either, and I counted that a beginning. The house was better than the letters had let me hope. A real frame house with a porch and glass in the windows, and it was clean the hard bachelor way, swept but not tended, a house that had lost the woman who made it a home and had been holding its breath ever since. There was a supper on the stove that Caleb had made himself. Beans and a tough side of bacon, and he set it out shy, apologizing for it before I'd tasted it, and I understood that this man had been doing everything alone for 2 years. The ranching and the child and the cooking and the grief, and had reached the end of what one person can do, and had written away for a stranger not because he wanted a wife, but because a little girl needed a mother and he did not know how to be both. We ate. Nell would not eat until I did. And afterward Caleb showed me to a small room off the kitchen that had been made up fresh with a quilt his late wife had pieced, and he stood in the doorway turning his hat and said, "You'll want to rest. We can speak of the arrangement tomorrow. The preacher comes through Sweetwater on Sundays. There's no hurry on it." And he was giving me a night, I understood, a whole night of grace before anything was decided, and I lay down in that borrowed room in my traveling dress with my ruined hand out of the muff at last, curled on the quilt in the dark like a small dead thing, and I wept as quiet as I could, because I had one more day of being wanted, and after that he would see. I meant to tell him in the morning. I truly did. But mourning on a ranch does not wait for confessions. I woke to the sound of a cow in trouble, a low, sick bawling from the barn, and I came out onto the porch in the gray light with my shawl clutched around me and found Caleb Ainsworth up to his elbows in a calving gone wrong. A heifer down in the straw and the calf turned the wrong way inside her. And he was alone, and he was losing them both. He looked up at me from the straw, this proud, quiet man, and there was no pride in his face at all, only a plea he was too worn to speak, and I did not think about my hand. That is the truth of it. For 2 years I had thought about nothing but my hand, and in that one moment I forgot I had ever been ruined. Because there was a living thing dying in front of me and I knew what to do. My father had raised cattle in Ohio, and I had pulled calves since I was 10. And I dropped to my knees in the straw, and I reached in with my good left hand, following the leg back, finding the turned shoulder, and I called out to Caleb what to pull and when. And between the two of us, his strength and my one good hand and my knowing, we turned that calf and brought it out into the cold morning slick and steaming, and it shook its ears and drew a breath, and the heifer heaved up onto her chest and began to lick it, and it lived. It lived because of me. I sat back in the filthy straw with blood to my shoulder and my hair come down and my whole body shaking, and I looked up and found Caleb Ainsworth staring at me like I was something come down through the barn roof. And then his eyes went. The way I had dreaded from the first minute, to my right hand where it hung useless at my side, the fingers curled, the scar shining wet in the gray light, out of the muff, out of the shawl, out of hiding at last, in the plain honest morning with a saved calf between us. He saw it. There was no muff in the world big enough now. I got to my feet and I made myself stand straight and I gave him the confession I had rehearsed for 11 days on the train, only it did not come out smooth at all. It came out broken. My right hand is ruined, I said. A lamp fire, 2 winters past, the same one that took my husband. I can't milk with it. I can't knead a loaf nor sew a fine seam, nor do the half of what a wife out here is meant to do. I wrote you the truth about everything but this. Because if I'd written it, you'd never have sent for me. And I know that's a low thing, to come all this way on a lie of leaving out. And I'll go back on the Sunday stage and I won't ask you for the fare. But I want you to know I'd have told you tonight. I'd made up my mind to it. I'm only sorry the cow told you first. And I stood there in the straw with my ruined hand held out in front of me so he could see the whole of it, the worst of me, uncovered. And I waited for the plain unkindness he'd promised he would spare me, because I had earned it now. I had lied. And a lie unmakes a promise. Caleb Ainsworth was quiet a long moment. And then he came across the straw, and he did the thing I have turned over in my heart every day of my life since. He did not look at my ruined hand with pity, nor with the cold arithmetic of a man counting what he'd been cheated of. He reached out with both of his own big scarred hands, hands broken and rebuilt a dozen times by the work of that country, a thumb gone crooked from a horse, a white seam across the back from barbed wire, and he took my ruined hand up into both of his as gently as if it were the calf itself, and he turned it over and looked at the whole shining wreck of it in the morning light. And then he lifted his eyes to me, and there were tears standing in them, this proud, quiet man, and he said, "Mrs. Hartwell, Eliza, I just watched that hand you're ashamed of save 2 lives before breakfast. I rode away for a wife because I couldn't keep this place and that child alive alone. And this morning a woman I've known one day crawled into the straw and did what I couldn't." He turned my hand over once more, gentle, and then he held it against his chest, ruined side and all, and he said the words I had crossed a country never expecting to hear. I didn't send for a pair of hands. I sent for a heart that would come 900 miles to a stranger and his grieving child. I married your heart the day I read your letter. The hands were never the bargain. And behind him, in the barn door, in her nightdress with her bare feet in the cold dirt, stood little Nell, who had crept out to see the calf, and who had heard the whole of it, and who was looking at my ruined hand not with fear now, but with a terrible, careful hope. And she crossed the barn to us on her small bare feet, and she reached up, and she did what her father had done. She took my curled fingers in both her tiny hands and held them, and she spoke, for the first time since I had come, in a voice rusty from 2 years of silence. "Does it hurt?" she said. And I knelt down in the straw so my eyes were level with hers, and I said, "Not anymore." And Nell Ainsworth looked at me with her mother's brown eyes, and she said the second full sentence I ever heard from her, which was, "Then you can stay," as if it were hers to grant, and I suppose in the truest way it was. We were married in Sweetwater the following Sunday, and I stood before the preacher in my better dress with my ruined hand bare for all the town to see, because I was done with the muff and done with hiding, and Nell held a bunch of blue camas flowers picked fresh that morning, not wilted this time. And Caleb slid the ring onto my good left hand and then, deliberate, in front of the whole church, lifted my ruined right one and kissed the shining scar across the back of it, and I heard the women of that town draw a breath all together. And I have been told since that more than one of them wept, and that from that Sunday I was not the crippled widow from Ohio, I was Mrs. Ainsworth, who could turn a breech calf with one hand. And there is a standing in a small town that is worth more than gold, and I had earned mine in the straw. But I will not pretend the road ran smooth from the church door. A ruined hand does not mend for being loved, and there was hard work on that ranch that I truly could not do, and the first months were a schooling in it for both of us, in what I could do and what I could not, and in the pride that had to be set down on both sides for us to find the way. I could not milk, so I learned to make the butter and the cheese, which wanted a strong arm, and a churn my good hand could work while the ruined one steadied. I could not sew a fine seam, so I did the mending Nell could not see, and taught the child herself to set her own stitches, her small quick fingers learning what mine had lost, the two of us at the window in the evening light, and it healed something in her to be the able one, to have a thing her new mother needed her for. I could not knead a great batch of bread, so I made the biscuits and the cornbread that wanted a lighter hand, and the ranch hands who came in from the range that summer swore Mrs. Ainsworth's biscuits were worth the whole of the wages, and I let them think it was skill and it was only love, which is the better secret ingredient anyhow. And what I could do, I did with a fierceness that came from all those months of being told I was of no use. I could doctor. My knowing of cattle turned out to be the rarest thing on that range, and when the bloody scours came through the calves that first summer, Caleb's neighbors, who had laughed at the notion of a one-handed wife, came riding to our door to fetch me, and I rode out with my satchel of remedies against my saddle, and I saved more calves that season than any man in the county, and Caleb Ainsworth would stand at the corral fence and watch me work, and I would catch the look on his face, and it was not pity, and it was never once anything but pride. I could keep the accounts, for I had my letters and my sums and a good left hand for figures, and I found within a month that the ranch had been bleeding money at the Sweetwater store through a bookkeeper who trusted a grieving man not to check his own tallies, and I set it right, and I saved us near $200 that first year, which in that country was the difference between holding the land and losing it, and I could love a frightened child back into speech, which is the thing I am proudest of in the whole of my life. Nell came back to us that summer, word by word. First the questions, then the chatter, then one blessed autumn evening the laughter, real and loud, when the new calf we'd named for her butted the water trough and soaked her through, and Caleb and I looked at each other across the yard over the sound of our daughter laughing, and neither of us could speak for the fullness of it. There was a night that first winter, the hardest one, a blizzard come down out of the mountains that pinned us 3 days in the house with the cattle drifting and dying in the draws, and on the second night Nell took a fever that climbed and climbed. The same lung sickness that had taken her mother, and I sat up with that child through the black hours, with my ruined hand laid cool against her burning forehead, because it turned out the scarred skin held the cold longer than a whole hand would, and there was a use for my ruin at last that no whole-handed woman could have given her, and I bathed her, and I dosed her, and I sang to her the low songs my own mother had sung. And near dawn the fever broke, and she came back to us wet and clear-eyed and asking for her father, and Caleb, who had spent the whole night on his knees at the foot of her bed with his face in the quilt, lifted up his head and looked at me holding his living daughter, and he said, so quiet, I almost lost it under the wind, I have buried one wife in this house. I did not think I could bear to love another soul enough to fear losing her. And here I have gone and loved 2 more in a single year, and I find I would not give back 1 hour of the fear for all the safety I had before you came. And I understood then that I had not been the only one arriving broken. He had written that plain, cold letter, "I do not expect love, but I will not be unkind," because he was as scarred inside as I was scarred without, and had thought his own capacity for it burned down to the wick, and we had come together each expecting to be barely tolerated, and had instead struck something like a flint 2 ruined people making, between them, one whole warm light. There was a woman in Sweetwater that first year, a Mrs. Pruitt, who kept the boarding house and kept, besides, the running account of everybody's business, and she had said in the store, where I could hear it, loud enough that hearing it was the point, that Caleb Ainsworth had gone and saddled himself with a cripple, that a man with 400 head needed a whole wife and not a broken one, and that the child would suffer for it. I had stood at the dry goods counter with my ruined hand in plain view and made myself finish my order in a steady voice and walk out with my back straight, and I had cried the whole 9 miles home where nobody could see. But that autumn Mrs. Pruitt's own grandson took the scours and the lockjaw both. A bad wound gone sour in his leg, and the doctor was 2 days off in Cheyenne. And it was me they came for in the end. Me they sent a rider for at midnight, because a broken wife who could save a calf might save a boy. And I went, and I sat up 3 nights in that boarding house with my satchel and my one good hand, and I drew the poison and broke the fever and gave that hard, proud woman back her grandson. She never did say she was sorry, for that was not in her. But she came to me at the church door the next Sunday, and she took my ruined hand, the one she had scorned, and she held it a moment in both of hers in front of the whole congregation, and that was her apology, and I took it. And after that there was not a door in that county closed to me. Caleb was waiting at the wagon when I came out, and he had heard. Everyone had heard. And he did not say a word about it. He only helped me up onto the seat the way he always did, and then, before he climbed up himself, he stood there in the road and looked at me a long moment with the whole of that storm cloud gray gone soft, and he lifted my ruined hand off my lap and pressed his rough lips to the scar the way he had at the altar, right there in the churchyard in front of God and Mrs. Pruitt and everybody, and he said, "Lo, just for me, there is not a whole woman in this territory worth the half of you." And I want to set down, too, the ordinary tenderness of it, because the saving of calves and the breaking of fevers make a fine story, but they are not the marrow of a life. The marrow was the small things. It was Caleb learning, without ever being asked, to set my teacup always at my left hand. It was the way he took to buttoning the back of my dress each morning in the cold, his big scarred fingers clumsy at the little buttons my right hand could not reach, the 2 of us laughing at his fumbling in the gray dawn light until the laughing turned to something quieter. It was the winter evening he came in from the barn with a thing he had whittled through a week of nights, a wooden spoon with the handle bent and carved just so to sit easy in my curled fingers, so that I might stir a pot with my ruined hand and give my good one a rest. And he set it in my hand shy as a boy and would not meet my eye. And I have that spoon yet, worn smooth as glass, 40 years of suppers in it. A man who does not expect love will show it in the shape of a spoon before ever he can say it in the shape of a word. That was near 40 years ago now. I am an old woman, writing this by a good lamp in the same frame house, and my hand has not healed. It never healed. It is curled and shining still. An old woman's ruined hand now on top of every... And Caleb Ainsworth sleeps in the Sweetwater Cemetery these 6 years, under the blue commas that comes up every spring without any tending, and I go and sit with him, and I am not sad the way you would think. Because we were given 40 years that neither of us was ever promised, and out of them came 3 more children after Nell, and Nell herself is a grown woman with a girl of her own who has my name. And the ranch that a grieving man could not hold alone now runs 1,000 head and is held by our sons. And it was held, all of it, all these years, by a heart that came 900 miles on a lie of leaving out, and a hand that could not milk a cow. I have thought a great deal, in my old age, about that morning in the straw, about the muff I clutched so hard, and the 11 days I spent rehearsing a confession, and the certainty I carried like a stone that the ruined part of me was the whole of what a man would see. I was so sure I was arriving as less than a woman, and a tall, shy man with a fistful of wilted flowers took my worst hand up into both of his and told me it was the very thing he had married. And a silent child touched my scar and asked if it hurt, and gave me back her voice in the same breath. And I learned the thing I would give anything to go back and tell the girl on that windy platform, which is that the places where we are broken are not the places where we are less. They are only the places where the light we did not know we had gets out. I could not milk a cow, but I could pull a calf in the dark, and set a ranch's accounts to rights, and hold a fever off a child with the very scar I was ashamed of, and love a grieving man back into believing. And if that is what a ruined woman can do, then I will take my ruin, and I will thank God for the lamp that tipped in the night, because it lit the whole long road that carried me home. He is out there, under the commas. I will be beside him soon enough, and I am not afraid of it, for I have already learned the one thing worth crossing a country to know. You come to the door with your worst held out in front of you, certain it will be the end of you. And a good soul takes it up in both hands and holds it to his chest and tells you it was never the bargain at all. The hands were never the bargain. It was always only the heart that was willing to make the journey. And mine had come 900 miles, and it was home.